There is a specific kind of silence that doesn't signal peace, but rather a slow, pressurized accumulation. You know this silence well. It is the quiet of a house before storm, the stillness of a rubber band stretched so thin it becomes translucent, vibrating with a frequency only you can hear. You are the person who never raises their voice. You are the one who handles it. You are the reasonable one, the peacemaker, the one who swallows the jagged glass of 1,000 small disrespects and smiles through the bleeding because you were taught somewhere along the way that your anger was a monster that had to be caged. But the cage is rusting, and lately the monster has been getting louder. We often mistake the absence of conflict for the presence of harmony. But for you, the absence of conflict is merely a high-stakes performance. It is a debt you are accruing, interest upon interest, until one day a dropped spoon, a misunderstood text, or a tone of voice from a loved one acts as the final grain of sand that collapses the dune. In that moment, the reasonable person vanishes. In their place is someone unrecognizable, someone cold or screaming or filled with a scorched earth bitterness that leaves everyone around you shell-shocked. And then comes the aftermath, the crushing weight of shame, the frantic apologies, and the rebuilding of the cage, stronger this time, until the cycle begins again. This isn't a character flaw. It isn't that you are unstable. It's that you are living in the wake of a psychological phenomenon known as emotional leaking, a byproduct of a lifetime spent practicing the art of the invisible burden. To understand why you explode, we have to understand the architecture of your containment. Imagine your emotional world as a vast underground reservoir. Every time someone oversteps a boundary and you say nothing, a gallon of water enters the reservoir. Every time you feel overlooked at work and tell yourself it's not a big deal, the water level rises. Every time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your own truth, the pressure increases. For most people, there is a release valve, a way to let the water out through small, honest expressions of annoyance or boundary setting. But your valve is welded shut. You were likely raised in an environment where anger was framed as a dangerous, ugly emotion. Perhaps you saw anger used as a weapon of destruction by a parent, and you promised yourself you would never be like them. Or perhaps you were punished for the slightest hint of defiance, learning that to be loved was to be compliant. So you became an expert at the Great Compression. You learned to categorize your anger as not worth the trouble. But psychology tells us that emotions are not ghosts, they are energy. They have a physical signature in the body. When you suppress a feeling, you aren't deleting it, you are simply moving it from your conscious mind into your nervous system. This is what we call the basement effect. You can push the boxes into the basement and lock the door, but the boxes are still there, molding, rotting, and eventually the floorboards of the house above begin to warp. The tragedy of the silent exploder is that your explosions are actually a desperate subconscious attempt at self-preservation. When the reservoir reaches its absolute limit, your brain perceives the internal pressure as a literal threat to your survival. The explosion is the emergency release. It is your psyche screaming, "I cannot hold anymore." But because the explosion happens over something seemingly small, the final straw, the people around you see the reaction as disproportionate. They don't see the 500 gallons of water that were already in the tank. They only see the cup of water that tipped it over. They call you sensitive or unpredictable, which only deepens your shame, making you even more determined to suppress your feelings next time. This leads us to a concept called the cognitive dissonance of the self. You have built your entire identity around being the kind, easygoing person. When you explode, it creates a terrifying rift in your self-image. You think, this isn't who I am. But the truth is more complex. The explosion is a part of you, but it's the part of you that has been starved of oxygen. It is the part of you that has been forced to carry the emotional shadow of everyone else's needs while yours were left in the dark. Think of the metaphor of the emotional dam. A dam is a feat of engineering, designed to hold back incredible force. But a dam requires constant maintenance. It requires spillways to let water out safely during a flood. If a dam has no spillway, it doesn't just leak, it fails catastrophically. You have been trying to be a dam without a spillway. You have mistaken withholding for strength, not realizing that true strength lies in the ability to move with the water, not just stand against it. We must look closer at the micro-trauma of the unsaid. Most people think of trauma as a single massive event, a car crash, a loss, a blow. But for the suppressor, trauma is often cumulative. It is 1,000 micro-erasures of the self. Every time you felt a spark of anger and extinguished it, you committed a small act of self-betrayal. Over years, these betrayals form a thick crust of resentment. Resentment is a slow-acting poison. It doesn't kill you instantly, but it makes everything taste bitter. It colors your perception of your relationships. You begin to see your partner, your friends, or your colleagues not as people, but as creditors who are constantly taking from you while you have nothing left to give. This state of chronic suppression keeps your nervous system in a state of high alert stillness. On the outside, you look calm, perhaps even stoic, but internally, your amygdala, the brain's smoke detector, is constantly pinging. You're in a state of functional freeze. You are waiting for the next demand, the next slight, the next reason to have to hold it in. This is why when the explosion finally happens, it feels like an out-of-body experience. You are no longer in control because the frontal lobe, the logical thinking part of your brain, has been completely bypassed by the limbic system, which is now screaming in a language of pure, unadulterated fire. But there is a specific nuance here that we often overlook: the pleaser's paradox. You suppress your anger because you are terrified of losing connection. You think that if you show your anger, people will leave. Yet, by suppressing it and eventually exploding, you create the very distance and conflict you were trying to avoid. The walls you built to keep the peace have become a prison that keeps you isolated. You are surrounded by people, yet no one truly knows you because they only know the curated version of you, the one that never complains. Imagine a bridge that is built to look beautiful but lacks the structural integrity to handle a heavy load. It looks perfect in the sun, but under the weight of a passing truck, it groans. You are that bridge. You have been so focused on looking good and stable that you haven't allowed yourself to be sturdy. Sturdiness requires the ability to flex, to creak, to announce when the load is too heavy. Instead, you stay rigid until the metal snaps. This snapping point is often followed by what psychologists call the emotional hangover. After the outburst, the silence that follows is different. It's heavy with the debris of what you said in the heat of the moment. You look at the people you love and see fear or confusion in their eyes, and your heart breaks because you never wanted to hurt them, you only wanted to be heard. But because you waited so long to speak, you didn't speak, you roared, and the roar drowned out the message. As we sit in this aftermath, we have to ask, what is the cost of this silence? It's not just the damage to your relationships, it's the damage to your body. Chronic suppression is linked to increased cortisol, weakened immune systems, and unexplained physical pain. Your body is trying to speak the words your mouth refuses to utter. The tension in your shoulders, the clenching of your jaw at night, the digestive issues, these are the ghost pains of your suppressed anger. Your body is the scoreboard, and it is currently losing the game. We find ourselves at a crossroads. You are standing in the wreckage of your latest spillover, wondering if this is just who you are. You are wondering if you are destined to be a ticking bomb, forever oscillating between a terrifying silence and a destructive storm. But to find the way out, we have to go back to the moment the first crack appeared in the dam. We have to look at the secondary gain of your silence. Why does part of you want to stay quiet? Why does the safety of the silence feel more comfortable than the risk of the truth? It's because in the silence, you feel in control. You feel superior to those who can't control themselves. You tell yourself a story that you are the bigger person. But this big person narrative is a trap. It's a way of avoiding the vulnerability of saying, I am hurt or I am overwhelmed. It's much easier to be a martyr than it is to be a human being with limits. However, the martyrdom is starting to feel like a slow execution. You are realizing that your kindness is actually a form of dishonesty, a mask that prevents true intimacy. As the pressure begins to build again, and it always does, you feel the familiar tightening in your chest. You see the signs. The reservoir is filling. The clouds are gathering on the horizon. But this time, something is different. This time, you're watching the water level. You are starting to realize that the explosion isn't the problem. The explosion is a symptom of a much deeper, much older wound. The wound isn't just that you were silenced. It's that you learned to silence yourself to survive. We call this self-silencing for safety, a psychological adaptation where the fear of abandonment outweighs the need for expression. You grew up believing that a good version of you was a quiet one and that any ripple you caused in the water would eventually drown you. So you became the anchor, heavy, submerged, and motionless while everyone else sailed above you. But an anchor that never moves eventually becomes buried in the silt of its own resentment. This is where we find the mirror of the unspoken. When you suppress your anger, you aren't just hiding your feelings from others, you are hiding your boundaries from yourself. You become a blurred shape, shifting and molding to fit the expectations of whoever is in the room. This leads to a profound loss of agency. You feel like a passenger in your own life, watching as people take your time, your energy, and your peace, while you sit in the back seat gripping the door handle until your knuckles turn white. But why does the explosion feel so good in the moment, even if the shame follows immediately? It's because for those few seconds of fire, you are finally visible. The psychology of the outburst is essentially a desperate bid for reality. In the heat of the scream, in the sharpness of the stinging remark, you are finally asserting that you exist. You are saying, I am here and I am hurting. The explosion is a distorted form of honesty. It is the only time you allow yourself to be unlikable, and there is a terrifying, addictive liberation in that. You no longer are the nice person, you are just a person.